The year was 1622. The Ottoman Empire was still one of the most powerful states in the world. But this great empire was no longer being shaken from the outside. It was beginning to break from within. On the throne sat a very young sultan, Osman II, known to history as Young Osman. He wanted to change the empire, to restore discipline to the army, to rebuild the collapsing order, and to lead the Ottomans back into an age of conquest. But because of this, he became a target within his own palace, abandoned by his own soldiers, his own pashas, and perhaps even his own people. He was left alone. But what if he had not died that night? What if young Osman survived the betrayal and came back? Could Ottoman history have been rewritten? Young Osman was no ordinary ruler. Despite his age, he was exceptionally educated. It is said that he knew Arabic, Persian, Greek, Italian, and even Latin. He possessed a mind far ahead of his time, especially after the Khotan campaign. He clearly realized that the Ottoman army was no longer what it once was. The once feared Janissaries had lost their discipline. Military power had turned into political power. They were no longer merely an army. They had become a force capable of deciding who would sit on the throne. And young Osman saw this. This was where the road to his death truly began. But the problem was not only the Janissaries. The Ottoman palace itself had changed. As strong sultan figures became less frequent, the internal factions of the palace grew stronger, especially the imperial harem, which was no longer simply a private residence, but one of the centers of political power. Who would become sultan? Which pasha would rise? Who would fall from favor? All of this was increasingly shaped by palace intrigue. Around Halime Sultan, the mother of Mustafa, alliances had formed with powerful pashas and Janissary leaders. Grand viziers and internal palace factions had begun to influence the throne directly. The empire was no longer fighting only external enemies, but internal struggles for power. But how did it all collapse in a single night? To understand that, we need to understand what young Osman was planning. He had already made one decision that would change everything. He no longer trusted the Janissaries. He had begun planning something far more radical. A new army. An army built not around the increasingly politicized Janissary corps, but around loyal Turkish forces from Anatolia, Syria, and Egypt. To make this possible, he announced that he would leave Istanbul for the Hajj pilgrimage. But this was not simply a religious journey. Behind that public announcement, there was another plan. His real intention was to cross into Anatolia, gather loyal troops, and return with a new military force capable of breaking the Janissaries' power. And then, the plan leaked. By the morning of May 19th, 1622, Istanbul was already beginning to shake. From the districts around Suleymaniye and Fatih, Janissaries and cavalry forces began gathering. By midday, the rebellion had reached At Meydana, the city's political heart. This was no longer rumor. It was open revolt. The rebels demanded fatwas and called for the execution of the Sultan's closest allies, names like Dilaver Pasha and Suleiman Aga. But Osman refused, and that refusal changed everything. By the evening, the gates of Topkapı Palace were under pressure. By nightfall, the palace itself was surrounded. Inside, a young sultan was watching his empire turn against him. The next morning, everything collapsed. The rebels stormed the palace, and in one of the darkest moments in Ottoman history, they brought out his uncle Mustafa, a man widely believed to be mentally unstable, and declared him sultan. The throne had been taken. young Osman spent the night hidden with a handful of loyal men. But even there, he was betrayed or abandoned. By late morning, around noon, he was captured. And what followed was perhaps the greatest humiliation ever suffered by an Ottoman ruler. Dressed only in simple garments, placed upon a market horse, he was paraded through the streets of Istanbul, insulted, humiliated, displayed before the very people he had tried to save. And still, the city remained silent. As he was humiliated through the streets of Istanbul, young Osman is said to have uttered words that would echo through history. "Yesterday, I was the ruler of the world. Today, I am left bare. Take warning from my fate, for this world belongs to no one forever." But what if everything changed here? What if young Osman managed to escape the palace that night? What if he reached loyal forces in Anatolia and returned stronger? This is where Ottoman history could have taken an entirely different path. The man who returned would no longer be a young idealist ruler. He would be a sultan shaped by betrayal, abandonment, and survival. His first targets would be clear: the pashas behind the rebellion, the Janissary leaders, and the palace factions. A great purge would begin, perhaps one of the harshest internal purges in Ottoman history. Everyone who tried to control the throne from within would be removed. And this is where the real transformation would begin. Young Osman's true goal was military reform. If he had succeeded, what Mahmud II would do 200 years later might have happened in the 1620s. The Janissary Corps could have been abolished far earlier. And if that happened, the Ottoman Empire may never have entered the stagnation period as we know it. The empire might have entered modernization much earlier. Istanbul was no longer safe for him. This could have pushed the center of power toward Anatolia. Bursa, Konya, or even a new eastern political center might have reshaped the empire entirely. A more centralized state, more disciplined, more distant from palace intrigue. And perhaps the greatest change would be seen in Murad IV. In a world where his older brother was never brutally murdered, Murad would not grow up shaped by trauma. Instead of palace conspiracies and power struggles, he could have focused on governing the empire. And both Osman II and Murad IV were rulers capable of personally leading armies into battle. This tradition might have returned. Campaigns, conquests, and direct leadership from the Sultan himself could once again become the Ottoman norm. Sometimes empires are not destroyed by enemies from the outside. Collapse begins from within. A silent crowd, a broken throne, and a ruler destroyed far too early because he was ahead of his time. Perhaps in a world where young Osman survived, the Ottoman Empire would have had a completely different future. And perhaps the greatest tragedy in history was this: he was right, but he was too young, and in the end, completely alone.